Good morning. This week in our short daily reflections, we are walking through some of the key events that occurred during Jesus' final journey to the cross. Today we come to the moment Jesus cleared the temple. So let's read from Luke chapter 19. As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace. But now it's hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you." When Jesus entered the temple courts, he began to drive out those who were selling. "It is written," he said to them, "My house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers." Every day he was teaching at the temple, but the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the leaders among the people were trying to kill him. Yet they could not find any way to do it because all the people hung on his words. Once again, we're caught up in the sheer drama of the gospel narrative. The gospels are such riveting reading. But what's going on here? What does this story have to teach us about Jesus, about people, and where in it can we find an example to follow or a command to obey? The passage follows immediately on from the triumphal entry where the crowds hailed Jesus as the king they were longing for, that would lead them to victory against their oppressors. But straight away we see that Jesus is not going to be that kind of king. He would bring salvation, but of a very different type and in a very different way than they expected. In today's reading, we see both the compassion of Jesus and the anger of Jesus. And of course, those two things are connected. It's so moving to see the depth of Jesus' feeling as he weeps over the city. The people had become blind to the purposes of God. Their short-sightedness, lostness, waywardness was only going to go one way and ultimately result in their destruction. And when Jesus arrives at the temple, his compassion turns to anger. Are not those emotions related? Righteous anger burns when we love so much. It's anger against the forces that bring harm, destruction, decay, and death. There's so much more going on in this passage than Jesus simply being upset with the commercialization of the temple. The word used for robber conveys more of the meaning of brigand or gangster. The temple had become a focus for nationalistic ideology. The religious leaders were the ones proliferating that. The temple was supposed to be the place where God's presence resided, the heart of Israel's special relationship with God, the place where the people's identity and vocation and purpose would be affirmed. But Israel in general, and the religious leaders in particular, had moved away from the faith and obedience that leads to the fulfillment of God's promises. And instead they were stirring up nationalistic tendencies based on their own selfish desires that could only lead ultimately, as Jesus prophesied, to violence, destruction, and defeat. The people had failed to recognize the time of God's coming, as it says in verse 44. But Jesus was coming, and Jesus would bring a rescue and a liberation and a salvation. He would pay the ransom price with his very own life. Jesus rescues us from sin and death, from all that leads to decay and corruption and pain in the world, from the sinful and damaging yearnings and lust for power, control, money, influence, and make a new creation of people with renewed hearts and minds full of the Spirit, living out in faith and obedience a new identity, being part of a new family and finding a new purpose. So how do we respond to this week? Well, let's make sure that we are the ones who recognize the time of God's coming, that we receive the invitation and call of Jesus to draw near to God because of what Jesus has done for us. Let's give up our own yearnings for power, control, money, and influence, and instead seek to live in relationship with God, filled with his presence, living for him in the world. So I encourage you this week to spend some time in prayer and meditation, reflecting on Jesus, thinking about what kind of Saviour he is, and what exactly it is that he's done for us and what difference that makes for us in our lives. And as we do that, why don't we ask him what he would like us to do for him at this time? Amen.